welcome again to everyone to this If Oxford event, Moving Together, Meet the Team. It's a pleasure now to introduce Bronwyn and also Anya, who together conceived this idea. And briefly, Bronwyn, if you could just say, why did you begin the project Moving Together? What was the origin?
Thanks so much, Dane. It's great to be here today. I started this project Moving Together because I was really interested in better understanding the facets of loneliness, who is affected by it and how are they affected by it. So I think everybody needs no introduction to the idea of social isolation and loneliness, especially today during the pandemic that we've been dealing with all around the world. But this has actually become a very serious concern and a massive challenge in the UK and all around the world, even before the pandemic hit. And so Moving Together, I wanted to work with artists, basically to try and explore the power of music and movement to act as a social glue, to bring people together, but also as a way of actually expressing the lived experience of loneliness and how we might connect with each other and understand more about how important it is to find ways to move together and to not feel so alone.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention that Bronwyn is a research collaborator and a research affiliate in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Oxford. And now I'm going to pass on to Anya, who is the Artistic Director of Justice in Motion. And Anya, could you just comment on your experience of this project and why the film came about and how it kind of worked out this way?
Because it was a complete roller coaster, basically. So about more than a year ago, Bronwyn approached me with this idea to have a collaboration between her research and us as a dance theatre company. And I was quite excited about that at the time as well, straight away, thinking, yes, let's do something. We love working with research and academia in general. But then the process shifted, or the timeline shifted and kept on shifting, and we went right to the beginning of this year. When we started the process, the idea was we would create a dance piece, summing up her research in a way, but also doing some dance workshops, movement workshops with people that have experienced loneliness. So that was the initial idea, that we would draw from those experiences. Obviously, the pandemic then hit, and we all went into lockdown, and the first initial idea or thought was, well, we have to postpone the project. Obviously, we can't get together and move and dance in one room. That's not allowed at the moment. So what can we do instead? And yeah, in a way, it's been a blessing in disguise for us as a project, because it's become much more fascinating and interesting, because we had to find a way of still bringing people together and still connecting them and still creating, having an artistic expression based on that topic. So instead, what we've done is we interviewed people on the phone about their experience of loneliness, and they told us their stories and shared really generously from their life experience. And it was anyone, like literally from early 20s to up in their 80s, 90s. So it was a real breadth of people that we interviewed. We asked about the shape of loneliness, what that looks like for them, where loneliness sits in their bodies, and so on. That all inspired us then through the interview, or what we heard, and we gave that to the composer who you will meet later on, Quentin. And he then transformed each of the interviews into a different soundbite, inspired by what the people said. That then went to one of our 6 dancers, who created a movement phrase, vocabulary that they showed, that summed up somehow their experience of the interview and the music. And then our filmmaker, Michael, got together with the dancer to create a short video gift, which we gave back to the individual people. So the whole collection of the video gifts is visible on all of the social media channels. We won't bore you with that right now, but go watch them if you haven't seen them yet. And then all of that process also inspired the short film. So the idea was that we would have the video gifts as individual explorations of a personal story, whereas the short film itself has much more a narrative and really feeds into the research and what we've discovered in the interviews that we've taken. So it combines all of the imagery, some of the sound bites, the movement as well, and everything comes together in a way in this short film. So we're quite excited. to show you that now.
And that's what we're going to do now. And I'm just going to play the video. Please watch the video yourselves with full sound and in full screen so you can enjoy it yourselves.
It was 2 years ago. I just left university and moved into my first house. I found just not having a physical presence there very disorienting, and I felt very isolated.
Old age is lonely in itself, unless you are very lucky and you have reasonable health and a little bit of security, then it's bearable. But it's a lonely road, especially if you lose a partner, which invariably you will.
I've been lonely for a long time. I think the only person I really miss, and that's my husband.
You know, I'm always lonely without a relationship. I always feel like I'm the odd one out, being in my own street. It feels like I'm ashamed and upset, and I feel like I'm not getting. You know, I feel like I'm not joining in any conversations or having fun with people.
I think I'm seen as this figure, but not as me.
There's something missing inside of me, and no matter how hard you try to ignore or fill that gap, it just doesn't really go away. In fact, the more you try to get away from it, the more prominent it becomes.
But I would have been all right with people, and some people were all right, but some people sort of scared me.
It feels like I'm entering a crack in a wall that only I can fit in. I feel like I'm traveling further into that crack.
There's not really a lot of energy coming into it from the outside or flowing out of it. It tends to be very stuck in itself. An emptiness, you know, just imagine a sort of bare and dusty room with nothing in it, without much light, without much beauty, and just without a way to express it, for it to come out.
Mass in your stomach, your solar plexus, a sort of pain or a hole, and sort of grasping onto that, really.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's almost an ache in the pit of my stomach. It's almost like I want to curl over.
The sort of rhythm of the heart is faster.
I want to scream. It's like almost like a primal scream, and tears that just won't come. So it's almost like I want to scream, I want to cry. I want to reach out, I want to cry out, but it's almost like I feel so stuck in that position that actually I can't even scream, I can't even cry, I can't reach out. It sort of just feels like, yeah, there's nothing, there's no one, there's nothing coming. It feels...
I feel like I can't breathe. It's almost suffocating. Sort of narrow path that leads to a dead end, and there's only enough space for myself.
I do feel lonely in the crowd, yeah. It's crowds of people, and then you feel lonely as well because you don't know anyone. And
it has been the absence of human contact and the humanity that is one of my greatest pains, because in that I get lost more often, I lose myself, I lose my bearings, I lose my sense of self. I have more opportunity to be taken over by thoughts and feelings and sort of getting into pits and and stuff like that. So being part of the world and being anchored in the world and with others has a very orientating effect on me.
Something fairly circular because it's continuous and there's no beginning and no end and it just goes on. So, you cannot
put an old head on young shoulders.
I think loneliness is often a feeling of heaviness and also of speechlessness, feeling like you either don't have access to the words to describe or you don't have someone to exchange ideas with.
And if I think about watching people dance together, they're very connected.
Things like that can give you hope. They can keep you going.
I think movement and music dispels the feeling of loneliness.
It feels loving and like unreal, like invisible arms, like you're being held, I suppose.
Other people and have something in common with being there.
When you can be with your tribe, whoever that tribe is, you feel like you're with them. You feel connected. Belonging, complete belonging.
I'd like to be of use in the community.
Feeling comfortable enough that someone would want to speak to you and that you're going to sort of actually enjoy a conversation.
Being in motion, really. I think that's, for me, the opposite of being lonely, being darting around and having your ideas travel in different directions, having
being there.
To have a special friend.
Being vulnerable, I guess, if you or they share something personal.
It's when I realize that someone's really listening.
Physical touch, hugs.
Different bonds forming and reforming, and that very dynamic state, I think. So maybe the opposite of loneliness is also a certain dynamism.
I don't think I completely thought about the idea that I wanted to be so small and disappear, but in reality that's sort of almost what happened. It was a cross between I didn't want to feel better and I didn't think I deserved to feel better. I sort of wanted to wallow in my own misery.
Isolation can make one feel very lonely.
When I do feel lonely, I can feel it in my chest. It's almost difficult to breathe.
I think the connection could either be with oneself or to other people around you, with the environment around you. Out on a sunny day and you're being like a beam of light.
On top of the world, when I feel like it's a good day, I'm on a high. It would probably be a flat surface. Without anything around me, it would just be the ground underneath me. It'd be flat. So there's nothing above me, there's nothing surrounding me. And it's somewhere I can stand my own 2 feet.
I feel warm and empowered, I think, and happy. Something about it feels right.
Dancing, like, for me, is a big sense of freedom.
Last summer I went to this jive class where you would dance with people all evening, and generally you didn't know anyone else who was there, but just through dancing with these people, it was, oh, you felt a connection.
And then we can carry on with the conversation around that rather beautiful and moving portrayal of how dance can be a powerful way to connect people when they might actually be feeling isolated. So we're now going to introduce all of the people who have been involved in this project. So we've got Bronwyn, who you've met, and Anya, who you've also met from the creative director for Justice in Motion. We also have Michael Lynch, who's a filmmaker, Quentin Lashpel, who's a composer, and Gemma, who's the choreographer. There's Chris, who's joining us, who is a participant, who is in the Moving Together project. Leslie Vaughan, who's from the Archway Foundation, which is a charity that helps people with loneliness, and they partnered up with Justice in Motion and Bronwyn to kind of get this project working. And we've got Ellie Pierce, who is a research fellow at UCL, and she's looking at loneliness and social inclusion in mental health contexts and networks. So hopefully everyone has arrived. You, the audience, is also ready. And again, just to remind you, there is the Q&A chat box at the very bottom that we're using for the questions. And if you do have a brief comment in there, you can also put the comment in the Q&A box as well. It's okay to put comments in the Q&A box because we can just look at those and we can store those for later. The introductory biographies of all the participants are also in the chat box. So if you want to have a look at that, and you can follow the links if you want to. So open the link up now, but don't read the information on that website. Come back to the Zoom, but you can open the link and read it later. What we want you to do is think of really interesting questions. And I've got a couple that I would like to just start off with. And the first one is for Anya. And I'd like to just understand why you've chosen to represent loneliness, and specifically, why have you chosen to represent it in the way that you've done so in the film?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. So we've interviewed 20 people in total and tried to listen to what the common denominators were and what maybe was different in the different experiences. And what has become very apparent is that some people say they feel really alone in a crowd, even though there's lots of people around them, they feel utterly alone because they're not with their own tribe maybe, or not with the people that they know because they maybe have just started university and don't know the surroundings yet. Then we have another group of people that feels lonely literally because they might have lost a partner, or they're of older age and not as mobile anymore, or have disabilities of sorts and therefore feel very, very lonely and haven't really got people around them. And that's really the case. And then there's a third denominator somehow where people said they experience loneliness and it's much more of a mental state somehow. So it's they felt they they get stuck themselves within this state, and they know they could get out of it, but it's almost hard to overcome it somehow. So that was also an interesting one that we wanted to portray, which is why we followed those three narratives, to portray that somehow.
Thank you. I mean, it's quite a difficult thing to describe, isn't it? The feeling of loneliness, isolation, anxiety. But when you're experiencing it, you damn well know it. So that moves on quite interestingly, I think, hopefully to Ellie. In terms of your academic research, how does what's been portrayed in the film, and also the context of the project and the lived experiences of the people who moving together has encountered, how does that connect with your kind of academic background and experience of loneliness research?
And it connects really, really well, which is lovely to see. Beautiful film, thank you. So I think it's probably good to try to define what loneliness is. So it's basically where there's a mismatch between the relationships that an individual has and the relationships that they like to have. So that's not necessarily the same as solitude, which some people can really enjoy, and it's not the same as social isolation. Because as Anya was saying, some people are lonely in a crowd. So in the research literature, there are three types of loneliness which map incredibly well to what Anya's just described. So the first type is called emotional loneliness, and that's where there's a sense of lack or dissatisfaction with a relationship, like a partner, so bereavement, or a relationship breakup. So it's really about those close connections and a feeling of loss or lack with those. And then the social loneliness, which is more about not feeling part of your neighborhood, that one of the participants talked about, not feeling like you've got a really strong social network, not feeling part of a community. And then there's a third type, which is really interesting because it hasn't really had a lot of research, which is existential loneliness. And that seems to be where you don't feel like you have a purpose, or you're not quite sure where you fit into the world. And that, again, people were talking about that they really wanted a purpose, but they didn't have that. And I think from what people were saying, it sounds like their loneliness was quite chronic. It'd been going on for a long time. They felt quite stuck in it. And we also distinguish that from more transitory loneliness, where someone's going through a transition, they go to university, they're missing, they don't have friends yet, but they do make friends and they kind of get over that loneliness, whereas some people seem to get stuck into that state. So that's another type of loneliness that we talk about.
Great, well, thank you for that background. There's a question or a comment rather, that's come in through the Q&A box from Kat, who loves the artistic choices that were used within the film, particularly how it was shot outdoors in public spaces. So then it means that I can ask Michael, like, why did you choose to make a film just like this? What were the kind of troubles along the way, and what were the kind of inspiration points that you found?
Wow, it's such an interesting process, in the sense of, we've made prior to this around 30 video GIFs, in which case it's gone via interview to dancer, interview to music to dancer to film, and then trying to navigate that process. What was unique about this particular project was all of it was to do with the quotes, what the participants had to say. I had no music to go off of, and so creatively we're trying to navigate, my gosh, what's the story, what do we tell? We've got all these amazing quotes, all these amazing, like, we want to tell the whole experience. So what was fantastic, I think, is Anya and Quentin will probably talk a little about that, about finding three sort of storylines. What was very present amongst the interviews, like a loneliness feeling in a crowd, or potentially like on a lower scale. So we tried to cover sort of three areas. And then from there, we were literally in Anya's room going, okay, we have to shoot this, this, and this. It's trying to make it very logistical, just so we can manage to shoot the whole thing in what feels less than like 2 days, and craft from there on. And just the editing process of that, laying all the quotes out, it feels like a happy accident almost. They were telling the story, it informed every single bit of this film, and it started to move me whilst I was editing it. and Quentin's done an amazing job with like the sound design, the music of it. It's fantastic because I feel like each and every gift Quentin has made like amazing piece of soundtrack. We've got all the gift in the sense of the interviews gone into that, and then I edit again to the music, and then I make a story from that. Without having the music, relying on the quotes, and then having to use the quotes and decorate the film purely from that basis, so it came all the way from that ground up there. And then when it comes to the locations and stuff outside, it's like, that looks good, is it close, great, let's go there. And so that was literally the whole process. Quick running here, we spent all the day and all day at Miles's house, so thank you, Miles. And right outside there was an alleyway which was a tunnel, so we aimed for certain places, and then I feel like things happened along the way, and then we used it to our fullest potential, and it was a thrilling journey. Yeah.
It sounds like quite the ride. So I just want to focus on the people who are involved in the actual part of the project. And there's a question directed at Chris, actually, if you don't mind. So how does it feel, what's it like to have your experiences portrayed in this way in the film? But also, could you just tell us a little bit about your experience as a participant in the Moving Together project?
Yes, of course. It was. I'm a volunteer with the Archway Foundation, and it was in one of the weekly sessions that I was approached to participate, and I hadn't heard back for a few months, and obviously at the start of during the pandemic, I actually someone got in touch with, I think it was Gemma who got in touch with me, and we started, talking more about the project and what was happening. And I was, they phoned me up and asked me a series of questions. And I think it came at a time where my own sort of experience with loneliness was quite acute. I'm a very sociable person, and a lot of what I do is, with other people. So the lockdown and sort of pandemic itself is, has been really quite difficult, and it was great to sort of take part and sort of be able to talk about it, talk about my own experience, and not only that, help with the project, because I've been aware about how loneliness has increasingly become a problem for a lot of people, and there's the mental and physical impacts that it has, and that's one of the reasons why I joined Archway, volunteered with Archway as well, to sort of try to make a difference in my own way, and it's the sort of the films are actually quite a good way to sort of reach out to people, and the way it was explained to me was really quite different. It was quite unique, and that really interested me, because it wasn't just a case of reading something or having someone talk to you. There was it engaged you in in different ways through sound, through visuals, and I think the sort of the films that have been produced have been, they've been excellent. It sort of touches, like, it reaches me in a sort of in an emotional level as well, just watching the different films, because it interprets the people's different experiences with.
Yeah, they're beautifully made, and you're right, they do kind of represent, it might be that they're not attending to all of the different kind of scientific descriptions of loneliness, but they're really talking to the lived experience of people. And I guess one of the nice things about having a digital project that produces these kind of video gifts is that sometimes talking about loneliness can be quite a difficult thing. I mean, if you're lonely and you're feeling not so great, you might not be wanting to just kind of jump up and start kind of talking about how how much fun being lonely is. You know, like, how do you start that conversation? And to kind of offer something that's a creative kind of springboard to go, here's a kind of a package of work that includes narrative, lived experience, kind of descriptions, some written words, some videography, some dance and movement, but then also there's this soundtrack that kind of brings the kind of piece together and kind of keeps the kind of thing going and alive in one's mind. So there's a question again from the audience members tonight. Well, there's a comment actually saying the soundtrack is really interesting. And then for Quentin, why did you decide to link actual words with music and rhythms? But also, like, why did you choose to kind of use the particular kind of soundscape that you've used, which obviously gives the textural background to the kind of emotional, the emotional resonance that Chris has been describing? How have you kind of used that to kind of pull up those feelings?
Yeah, sure. So the way we worked is Gemma and Bronwyn runs the interviews with the participant, and I was kind of the first to listen to the interviews. And my job was to try to capture the essence of what the participants' experience were, and try to translate into music. So it's kind of the music was supposed to either put you in the shoes of the person, the experience, and try to make you feel certain feelings. So, and one person was talking about the ache in the pit of his stomach. So I was trying to come up with some kind of sound design to kind of recreate that feeling of the pit in your stomach. Yeah, so I was trying to put people in the shoes of the participants, or just to try to trigger some emotion, so people would be engaged with it, and the message, the impact of the message would be bigger and grander. So the way we worked is, so first we did all those dirty gifts. So that gave me a good way of practicing, basically, or trying to come up with a sound palette and little motifs and melody that we could then later use into the for the short film you've just watched. And originally we thought we would do a mix between the quotes and voices from the participant and music, and then I don't know, it got mixed up. So most of the videos were just music, but then for the short film we thought, hang on, we need the voice of the participant, because they're the real people. Really, we're just there to help them, like to help their message. We're just a messenger. They're the real people. So we put their voices in. And the question was about how I use words and to put in rhythm. I think the rhythm was in the words. You just have to, and especially when you listen to the same interview so much. For me, some quotes turn into rhythm anyway, so they kind of make sense to me. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
It did. Thank you. And I think it does pull together the different kind of facets really nicely. So we've got a couple of questions about the composition of the participants, which we'll return to in a second. But I'd like to just ask Leslie, if you don't mind, could you just tell us a bit about the Archway Foundation and the types of people that you normally work with?
Mm-hmm. Well, Archway has been going in Oxford for about over 30 years, and we also run groups in Abingdon. And as well as the groups, we also do one-to-one support for people who are lonely. And we're heavily reliant on volunteers, because unlike a lot of groups where you can perhaps just go along to a social group and it's down to you to make it work, volunteers are not paired up exactly, but they certainly are really, really imperative to the way the groups run, and also their one-to-one supporters. So a lot of people have experienced loneliness, whether they be staff, volunteers, or friends, and as we call the participants. And the people who come along are from every walk of life you can imagine, both volunteers and the friends. Some are referred, some are self-referred, some just drop in. It just depends on what the group is. We have people who are perhaps older and have had their families perhaps move away, and their friends die and partners die, and therefore they don't know anybody anymore. We've got people who are new to Oxford who find Oxford quite a difficult place to infiltrate and don't necessarily have a network of people to become friends with, partly because of the transient nature, I think, of the city. We also have people who've been homeless and some who are still homeless, some of whom are hoping or at least trying to establish a new life in their own independent living space. So they're also trying to create a network of social support. People who've got ongoing mental health problems, people with physical difficulties, but the core for everybody is this sort of essence of feeling that they are lonely and cut off in some way from society. Having said that, it does generate friendships. Inevitably, people do become friends and get to know each other and support each other. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you. And it's such a lovely organisation. I mean, you're right, Oxford is a very transient place. It's quite a high pressure environment sometimes, and kind of forming new friends, and then after kind of 2 years of their research contract, they then go away, or they're a student, or the churn of people, and also the kind of the social range that is around, the people who live in Oxford. There's a huge range of kind of social backgrounds and economic backgrounds, and all of those kind of influences that kind of can affect people's mental health and social kind of connectivity and sort of status and all that kind of work. So I think it's really good to have such an amazing organisation like Archway that kind of supports people, and especially now at this really difficult time. There is a question or a couple of questions actually that people have asked about the demographics of the people who were involved in the project. And so obviously we're just finding out from Leslie that, Archway is involved with people at any life, kind of any age, but the dancers that are in the film, they're in a relatively kind of narrow age bracket. And maybe Anya, if you could answer that question about why did you choose to first portray this group of people in the film, but also maybe talk about the other people that aren't in the film that were part of the project.
So yeah, I saw a question as well about why didn't we interview younger children even, just because we didn't get the volunteers in that age group. Otherwise we would have happily so interviewed younger people as well. That was the plan, literally from very early to very late in their age groups. Why did we choose the dancers as they were? That is a very good question. It just happened to be the dancers that were interested in the project and available as well. So we didn't, because obviously the pandemic meant that we couldn't necessarily audition people or, call out to crazy new networks. It meant that we wanted to work with people that we knew or we have worked with before. And so we reached out to dancers that we knew were available and ready to take on the project as well and interested in the project. So that was the choice. But a very good point that it could have had the whole range. I guess we had cast the dancers before we did the interviews, so we didn't know who would be coming. So it was much more a blank canvas. That was the idea for that.
Thank you. And maybe Gemma would like to kind of offer a comment. So you're just thinking about how the choreography was working. And so the movements, are cool. They're striking. They're well coordinated. They're much more coordinated than I could do. So how did your choreography support the project, especially during lockdown when people are kind of supposed to be kind of separated from each other? And how did you kind of manage to make that work?
So within the research process, we started with the idea of a physical workshop. How would that be evolved with physical presence? And that information would then feed the music and then the dance itself. So I think that it was key, the transformation of this workshop into interviews, and to try to keep the embodied experience of the workshop through tools that were accessible, because we knew the type of range of participants we were working with, and like a phone call, everybody had access to. So then how do you formulate those questions to keep the body, the physical body, present? I hope I'm making sense, because that was key for me. And because during the interviews, we asked for, are you sitting, are you standing? Or for example, where in the body, like physical parts of the body, where do you feel loneliness or its opposite? And we also ask them to describe an image that then me and Bronwyn would draw, and that would also support the visual inspirations for Quentin and for the dancers. So having this type of answers that were embodied make it very easy then to communicate towards the dancers and think of, okay, take it more of a state or a physical place to start moving from, and then each dancer would express themselves from that place. So that's what would connect us for the gifts. And then from the gifts, we composed the short film. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then there are a couple of questions in this space, and I feel you've answered them around the process of how do you achieve kind of choreography collectively at distance. So there was a project that I'm just going to mention very briefly. We were involved in something called Digital Body, which is another kind of dance-based activity. Mm-hmm. And we chose to work with the Parasol Dance Group, which is an Oxford-based young persons organisation for people who are disabled and non-disabled. And we wanted to put together a piece of dance work that brought them together, but obviously, physical distancing was happening. And we used motion capture technology to kind of create a digital music video where all these kind of people were dancing separately and then were kind of spliced together in the digital space. So it's just really interesting to kind of see your approach of how to connect people when actually the sort of physicality is limited because of the COVID situation. Yeah. And then I'm going to just ask Bronwyn actually about what is there's obviously an emotional response that kind of happens when you dance like in a physical kind of space. And could you just talk a little bit about like what's the difference if you kind of have to do this separately compared with if you can dance as a kind of community social kind of activity?
It's such a great question, I think, from Carl. Thank you for the question. I think to some extent, the truth is that we don't really know how different it is. And I hope that there are lots of other researchers out there that have been taking advantage of this time. We were doing this project moving together, and I hope that others might have been doing research to try and see whether or not these dance classes or, gatherings online where people are moving together, but at a distance do have some effect. We did have a flash mob actually last weekend where dancers had learned some of the choreography from this project and came online at the same time and performed it live to a YouTube audience live, which was the first time any of us had done that. And it was really weird and surprisingly cool. So I do sort of feel like our brains are basically very easily tricked into thinking that we are actually closer to each other than not. And that very much links to my research on synchrony and how easy it is to kind of, when you do end up doing something in synchrony with others, you're basically tricking your brain into getting a little confused about where, what your body is and what someone else's body is, and thinking then that you can just somehow reach some kind of togetherness, some kind of merged sense of oneness through that movement. So I'd like to think that not being able to physically touch or be physically in the same space still results in some positive effects. And I have to say in the short film, which I just saw now with everyone live, that final scene when all of the dancers were finally together in the same place really represents a moment in this project as well, where everyone was actually physically finally in the same place. It's a very powerful moment that I'm sure they would attest to it being much more powerful than anything we had done online prior.
You begin to sort of really value the physical. It's almost, 12 months ago, we just took it for granted. And now it's just so much more special to kind of be in a place with each other. So there is a question also from George that maybe Ali can answer this one. is that what are the biggest things we can do to kind of combat loneliness or make ourselves feel a bit more socially alive and connected?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I signed up to do this question, and it's a really, really hard question, George. So I just wanted to say that in terms of the research evidence we have, we don't really know. Is the short answer to your question. The strongest evidence we have is actually about psychological approaches, because, as I said at the beginning, loneliness is about your perception of your relationships. And I thought it's really interesting in the film that a lot of people were talking about feeling quite threatened, and the body sensations to me sounded very much like flight or fight, kind of very tense and scared. And I think our research has shown that when you're feeling lonely, you're more likely to interpret kind of ambiguous social situations as threatening. And so one way to help people can be by getting them to kind of reframe those situations. So that's what we have the most evidence for. But there are other approaches, obviously. So things like what Archway does. So I used to volunteer for Archway, brilliant organisation. And I think they illustrate two other approaches really well. So they have a one-to-one befriending scheme where people meet up with people one-to-one and give that social support, but they also have the group gatherings where there's opportunities for people to engage with others. And I think what's really great about Archway is this buddying system that Leslie was talking about. So, you know, it can be completely terrifying walking into a room full of people you don't know, but volunteers are there to help them through the door. So I think that's really important, having that kind of support to transition into a new group. But I think it really depends on why someone is lonely. So if they're lonely because they don't have opportunities to engage, then something like going to Archway or going to a dance class would be great. But if it's someone who feels lonely in a crowd, I think these more psychological approaches are probably more helpful. So I think it really depends on the individual, but it's a great question and we're continuing to do research to try and answer it.
I think you're right. It's a really interesting kind of question to try and muse on, because it's impossible to know, even yourself, if you're feeling lonely, exactly what is the root cause of it. In very kind of social and animated kind of crowd situations, you might, I don't know, you just might not feel comfortable to engage with the sort of party that's going on just over there. And so there's a question that came up, and I think Michael's going to respond to this one, about people who were kind of encountering this slightly wacky spectacle in the streets, of people kind of dancing in a kind of sort of quite highly organized and quite beautiful piece of artistic work in dance. And so you're filming this thing and people are just wandering past. Like, was that deliberate, or was it just as it was?
It's a weird thing because it's really beautiful when it happens, and it just happens because people are there. If you're in the middle of the street especially, and we try to get as many people as possible, and yet we get there so early there's no one around, and so we were just there practicing amongst ourselves for a while, and people started to come past, but people are always on their journey, on their way. And it's an interesting thing where people just, with confidence and in the setup, you accept it as the norm, and that's a really interesting psychological thing for people as well. But it really added to that element of the film of just being alone or distant. And then from the walking, again, you've got Miles joining or Daniel joining some of the dancers in that come out of nowhere, and it adds to that special effect. Though we did have a few people who stood there to admire it, wanted to speak to us, and that in itself is also beautiful. And for those pockets of people, it feels really valuable shooting this outside. You don't know what's going to happen. Some really weird things happen. But for those people that do come and want to talk, if we hadn't have been there, I feel like, I don't know, that experience there in that pocket moment is really special. So yeah, it was an added thing that was, I think, contributed to the film really well.
Yeah, you can't second guess what the general public is going to do at sometimes, can you? So there's a question in the box here. So someone who loves to dance, as someone who loves to dance, how do they encourage isolated people to jump on board and get involved, especially if these people are reluctant or suspicious about dance as an activity, or even worse, You know, there's that kind of classic, is that, there's a music video, isn't there? Is it Robin that does that music video, Dancing on My Own? Where, you know, dance like no one's watching you. You know, if you're not very good at dancing, or you don't feel like you're very good at dancing, if you're going to start wiggling your arms and legs and body around, you might feel a bit like an idiot, you know. But if, you know, and Gemma, obviously you're very good at dancing. How do you encourage people to dance when they might not feel necessarily comfortable to do it in the first place?
Go ahead.
Gemma,
Okay. I can hear the feeling of, so for me, what it helps, just to start small, like with your, imagine these are my feet, just start with your feet going like that. That could be an option, just very small. That may lead you to move your shoulder, maybe not, but just start small. In the shower, going from the bedroom to the kitchen, small. That would be like a quick thing. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer. And another plug for a different festival activity. There's on the festival website, there is an on-demand event called Orbit, which is a 5-minute just start dancing or start moving in a coordinated way. And it's almost like using a hula hoop sort of thing, where you're just kind of creating an orbit, and it's very simple. It's the kind of thing, it's almost like a bit of yoga, you know. And I think, Gemma, as you're saying, start small, just get to feel how your body's working. We don't have to kind of be in a mosh pit or doing kind of classical ballet. Just even moving in a coordinated way, it just liberates, you know, endorphins and things. It can just make you happy kind of moving around. So thank you. I think that's really good. And then maybe Anya, if you could, like, how do you then move from these very simple kind of phrases to be producing this quite spectacular coordinated project?
You keep on falling several times, and you know, you know, it's I kind of wanted to mention also with the pandemic, another thing that has come through that was fascinating to us, especially. We've been running dance classes for several years now, regularly, contemporary dance classes. And we have people come and join, and they enjoy it as well. But some might be hesitant to join because they feel like, oh, this is kind of daunting, people moving in a space, and I don't know, I can't follow the steps, so I can't do choreography. Now, since the pandemic, we've been offering dance classes online, so on Zoom, which is not great for everyone because some people haven't necessarily got the space in their home, or just are on Zoom all day long and can't face another Zoom thing. But for some, it has really helped and unlocked the ability to just move, and maybe just even switch the camera off and no one is watching. And even though they are part of a group that is moving together, which is quite beautiful. And we have a couple of people, especially one guy who literally, he was a beginner and he joined our dance classes just as we started the year, and he's been coming literally every dance class, sometimes 6 a week, and he's just improved so much. So big shout out to him as well, because he's just moved along with all of us, because it didn't matter, because he wouldn't be bumping into anyone, because it's just, you know, he's in his own space. And I think having online classes allows that somehow to just move and try it out and still have the community with others around you. Yeah.
Thank you. Bronwyn, you had a comment.
Yeah, I really want to reiterate, because I think everyone involved in this project already had a proclivity for movement and dance, you know, myself included. I'm a dancer. That's what got me interested in understanding the power of movement in the first place. But everything I've learned from a sort of scientific perspective has reinforced my genuine belief that even if you are not a trained dancer, it is very much in your bones, in your DNA, to want to move to music. You might just tap your foot in time or move your head in time, and that's it. And that's also fine. You know, it really is a big part of being human. And so this whole idea of dancing, it doesn't have to be in the beautiful version we've just seen in this short film. Just allowing yourself and maybe noticing that you do start to nod your head when a song comes on the radio and you're driving in your car, whatever. That right there is moving together, actually. And it is actually very powerful in itself. It doesn't have to be in a massive performance for it to count when it comes to, say, releasing endorphins and making you feel good.
Thank you. And certainly when we've got a catchy tune maybe on the radio and you're, I don't know, cooking pasta or something, and you start kind of dancing a little bit, you just do feel a bit better, don't you? There is a question about participating in arts and how that can help with loneliness. I want Leslie, if you don't mind, just to comment on how you've seen this kind of project impacting on some of the people that are involved with Archway, and then maybe we can pass on to Ellie to kind of offer a different view on how participating in arts can help with people expressing loneliness. So Leslie, maybe if you could offer some comments on Archway's experience.
Well, unfortunately, because the initial meetings that were in person, when they took place straight after that, we went into lockdown. So I've not seen anybody since, but we are in contact with everybody. And all I know is when I initially suggested it to people, I was astounded by the sort of response, and people, it seemed to resonate with people straight away. The idea that dance could help them counteract the feelings of sadness, loneliness that they had. And particularly people who'd got good memories of that having happened for them. They were really, really keen to participate. So I can only talk about the previous experience that I had in terms of talking about it with people. But I do know that Archway has for a long, long time had lots of activities that were involved with music particularly, and to some degree dance, and I know they're always very enjoyable, but I can't speak for those that have participated subsequent to doing the project.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I mean, hopefully you'll be able to kind of track people's kind of responses over time, and I'm sure this project, like the festival, you know, is always being interested in kind of audience responses and how what is the impact of all this stuff that we're, you know, putting effort into kind of doing. Is it a positive impact? So maybe Ellie, if you could just reflect on the positive impact or negative even of kind of artistic kind of endeavors in the social context.
Yeah, so I've done some research looking at singing and whether that creates connection within groups, and from what we've found so far it does, similarly to dance. But I also wanted to, the question was also about other art forms, and there's a really great project led by James Duggan from Manchester Metropolitan University in collaboration with a local charity, where they got young people to create cartoons about loneliness. So it was sort of similar to this project in that it was exploring what was their experience of loneliness, but through drawings rather than dance, which I thought was really interesting. So it's definitely worth checking out. And there definitely are people looking into arts as a way to reduce loneliness, but I'm afraid I don't know that research that well, but I think the simple answer is yes, I think it does, but I think it probably depends on whether the person wants to participate. So if they don't want to sing, making them join a singing group is not going to help, I don't think.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. So don't force it, but if it feels right, this could be a positive thing for you. I think we are beginning to kind of run close to finishing time, so thanks so much for all these kind of comments, and thanks also for the questions from the audience. Anya, Bronwyn, I don't know if you'd like to just add anything else, if you'd like to cover anything that hasn't been attended to just yet.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for watching and for coming along this evening, and for sharing this special premiere with us. As we mentioned throughout the process as well, or throughout the evening, this evening, we have been working on 30 different video gifts that are all available on our website, on YouTube, and it's in the chat box right now, on an Instagram gallery page specifically designed for that. So if you haven't seen them, please head over there and watch as many as you possibly can. There's also a nice one where I'm dancing in the kitchen, for example. That's something that came out of an interview, so you know, you'll see that portrayed as well. And yes, check out the social media, have a look on our website as well. If you feel lonely, if you want to talk to anyone as well, then there's a list of resources on the website, so please head over there and see where you might be able to link in if you want to. Apart from that, because it's a research project and it all started with research, we are really, really interested and curious about your experience of today's event, but also if you have been following us throughout this month specifically and watching video gifts, or maybe you joined in the flash mob or watched it back afterwards, or maybe you were one of the participants as well if you're watching and have been interviewed. We have designed a survey which we'll drop in the chat box as well. If you could follow that link after this event, after we're closing it off, we would love to hear your feedback. It would be of great value.
We will be putting the survey as well, so everyone will get an email later on, and we'll put the link to the survey in there. So thank you. Bronwyn, do you have a
closing thought? Thank you so much, everyone. I also really want to thank all of the people that have joined us today, many of whom I think are also participants from this project right from the beginning, and others who are just coming in now to see the final product. And also really a huge testament to a very innovative attempt to merge different ways of approaching research between myself and the artists. This has been hugely informative for me, learning from them how you can use movement to understand more what someone might be saying when you interview them about something, and how that can contribute to our understanding about loneliness in an interdisciplinary sense. So massive thanks to everyone involved in the project, and also to you, Dane, today, and the IF Oxford Festival for hosting us. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure. I think that's a really nice comment to end on. We're all learning at the moment, and how we're all collectively responding to this new perturbed situation that we've had thrust upon us, and is probably going to be going on for quite some time. We've just had, for those of you who live in Oxford, we've just had text messages come through saying that Oxford is just about to go into tier 2. So, we're going to be in lockdown for a little bit longer. Thank you all the panelists that were part of the discussion tonight, and for the audience. There was a comment about why we've chosen to use a webinar, and it's just tricky. Obviously, we'd like to do this in a lecture theatre or a pub or some other kind of social space, but sometimes we're just kind of penned in by what we've got. Just a final kind of comment on some artistic projects that we've got going on in the festival. There's a project that we're running with Oxford City Council and the Oxford Christmas Light Festival, where we're encouraging people not to dance, but we're encouraging people to make, and I'm going to turn my video off for a second so you can see this, because it won't work otherwise. I'm very proud of this, so I'm just going to show it to you. So we're making LED kind of light shows with an Arduino, so you can get this little piece of tech, and you can, rather than dancing, you can get involved in computer coding as an artistic project that we're doing with Fusion Arts. So I put together all of these wires and lights and coded it up with some help from people from Science Oxford and some other partners. And we're just trying to find, in these constrained times when we can't come together, how can arts be a really liberating and socially connecting kind of vehicle? And Ellie was talking about that just earlier on, and how if you want to have a go, please just try. And hopefully Justice in Motion, Archway, IF Oxford, and all the kind of people who have been participating tonight, and you, of course, the audience, are involved in this positive movement. We want to try and build back better, so let's try and do that. Thanks so much. There is a feedback form that's coming into your inbox. Please fill it in, and if you would like to make a contribution to the festival, it's an independent charity that runs the show every year, and if you'd like to pay what you decide for this event, please do make a contribution. But with that, thanks everyone again for coming. Thanks Anya, thanks Bronwyn, thanks Justice in Motion and the Moving Together team. I'm going to call it a night. Watch the video again, it's really beautiful. Bye-bye.